First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. This week we're not gonna actually start Pirkei de Eliezer. We're gonna start an introduction to Pirkei de Eliezer with basic things about, first of all, what we're gonna say, what this year is about, what we're gonna do in the year, who wrote Pirkei de Eliezer, what is Pirkei de Eliezer, and if we have time, a few other ideas about maybe about the Mechaber, about naming sefarim in general. So the Kudah is like this. What is Pirkei de Eliezer? So Pirkei de Eliezer is a sefer over here, written by it's a sefer from Tanoim, from Chazal. It's a Midrash, and it's like other Midrashim that, like what a Midrash is that it adds a layer of interpretation, of explanation to whatever it says in the Torah Shebechsav. It goes through psukim and adds extra things. Especially Pirkei de Eliezer in specific, especially goes through the stories of Sefer Bereshis, especially Brias HaOlam, and other stories in Sefer Bereshis. A few other places in Tanakh also it touches on, but the focus of most of the things that Pirkei de Eliezer talks about are things in Sefer Bereshis. But Pirkei de Eliezer is a little bit unlike other Midrashim in a few ways. First of all, Pirkei de Eliezer, other Midrashim, the Midrashim that we're familiar with, Midrash Rabbah, Midrash Tanchuma, these type of things, even Midrash Seichel Tay, Midrash Lekach Tay, which were written later, but they're also Midrashim. They go in the order of the psukim. They're really written as a pirush on, Midrash Bereshis Rabbah is a pirush on Sefer Bereshis. It goes almost pasuk by pasuk. It says this pasuk brings explanations on this pasuk. The next pasuk brings explanations on this pasuk. Pirkei de Eliezer is not like that. Pirkei de Eliezer is a sefer broken up into prakim, and each parak is a different topic or a different discussion, and in the discussion in each parak, it says all kinds of different ideas and drush, and sometimes it brings the pasuk that it's talking about, sometimes it doesn't bring the pasuk that it's talking about, and a lot of things in Pirkei de Eliezer goes like completely like off topic from what you thought it was talking about. It just goes it takes a turn and then it starts talking about this, and then it talks about this, and then it takes a turn. So a lot of the interesting points in Pirkei de Eliezer come out from things that are not mamish on the topic. So that's how Pirkei de Eliezer is similar to Midrashim, and it's different than a lot of the other Midrashim. Also, Pirkei de Eliezer, there's a lot of sefarim in Chazal that we have stam Gemara. The Gemara is not miyuchas to a specific person. We say that Ravina and Ravashi were the ones that sort of edited the Gemara, but the Gemara it's a general work from Chazal. But we have other sefarim from Chazal that are miyuchas person. For example, the Gemara says that Seder Olam was written by Rabbi Eliezer ben Chalafta. We say that Midrash Tanchuma is apparently miyuchas to someone named Rav Tanchum or Rav Tanchuma. Avos Rabbi Nosson is a pirush on Meseches Avos from the Tana, the last generation Tana of Nosson, who's a contemporary of Rabbeinu Kodesh. We have others from let's say the Zohar is miyuchas to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. We have Mechilta de Rashbi, Mechilta de Rabbi Shmuel, Sefer. That's already could be a different sugya. We say Stam Sefer, Stam Sefri. I don't know if it means that it was written by that or it was written according to his opinion. We have different sefarim in Chazal that are miyuchas to different people. So Pirkei de Eliezer is miyuchas to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to speak a little bit more about him in a moment. I just want to explain what we're going to do in this year. There's a few nekudas. First of all, what I want to do in this year is Pasha to read through what it says in Pirkei de Eliezer, read like line by line and translate it and understand Pasha Pshat and what it's saying, what's going on over here, as far as we can understand. Some things are just Kabbalistic things that you have to know what in the world you're talking about. But as far as we can understand, say Pasha Pshat. The other thing is to speak about different difficulties that arise when we're reading it, and say, what does this mean? What's the kashas, and explain what the kashas are, and especially what I think is important is to compare what it says in Pirkei de Eliezer with what we find in other sefarim, in Gemaras and in Targumim and in Rishonim, and see how does Pirkei de Eliezer fit with what we have Meseres from other Midrashim, and what's is there a machlekes? Is there a way to understand what's the sherish of the machlekes? That's another nekuda that we want to do in studying Pirkei de Eliezer. We're going to discuss in a moment the different mafarshim that exist on Pirkei de-Rebbi. So one of the things that I would do in preparing for the shir is to go through, look at the mafarshim and try to see which ones are relevant to the olam, and while we're reading it, to speak out some of the different pshatim that the mafarshim say and the issues that the mafarshim discuss. Now, as I'm saying, I'm not pretending to be, a huge Talmud Chacham and saying that I know everything. I'm just trying to bring out the discussion, try to facilitate the discussion, and I'm going to really depend on the olam, every one of you guys, to ask questions and bring ha'aras, and if we have a question, maybe someone else will have a teretz. I'm not pretending to know everything, so I'm just trying to help be masada things. If you heard a pshat in something that Pirkei de-Rebbi says, or if you saw a pshat, or you thought of a pshat, or you have a question, feel free, completely free to say it. I'm not saying that I have an answer, but maybe someone else has an answer. We could just to speak about it, Pasha. What I would try to take achrayus for, at least, is to balance going weiter and covering ground with analyzing and having a better havana in what it's saying. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, we have a nice discussion, and we got to go weiter now. Just push it, because otherwise, you can keep handling, and you're never going to get anywhere. So this edition that I have of Pirkei de-Rebbi, it's a very nice print. It's also very expensive, from Zichron Aaron in Muncie. So it has different mafarshim, and a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be based on the classic mafarshim on Pirkei de-Rebbi. It's brought down in the Hakdam of the Pirush Radal on Pirkei de-Rebbi. It says that the Vilna Gaon said that when you learn a sefer, you should know who wrote it, which could be the point we might have time to discuss maybe later tonight. But you should know who wrote the sefer. So I'm just going to go through the different pirushim that exist in this edition and say who wrote it. The most basisi pirush on Pirkei de-Rebbi, it's sort of like Rashi, but he doesn't have so much. It's called Bayis HaGadol. It's also printed at some point also under a different name called Bior Maspik, but it's really called Bayis HaGadol. It was written by Rav Avram Aaron Broida, who lived in Vilna. His sefer was printed in the 1830s, so he lived in the early to mid 1800s. He wrote a few other sefarim, including Beis Vad, which is interesting sefer on halachas of things that you're supposed to be doing sitting up or standing down. So that's an interesting sefer that he wrote. And another sefer called Lishkas HaSefer, which is a sefer on Hilchos Stam, a sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah. Another mefarish that we're going to use a lot on Pirkei de-Rebbi is Pirush. I call him Marzu. Other people call him Marzav. I pronounce it as Marzu. He also lived in Lithuania, and originally in Grodno and in Vilna in the early 1800s. And he's more famous, I think, for his Pirush on Midrash Rabbah, called also Pirush Marzu or Marzav, whatever you want to call it. His name is Rav Zev Wolf Eichenhorn, and he lived again, as I said, in Grodno in Lithuania, and then later on in Vilna in the early to mid 1800s. He wrote this Marzu on Pirkei de-Rebbi, and he also wrote Marzu on Midrash Rabbah. The third mefarish on Pirkei de-Rebbi is Rav David Luria. He was also that in that same tkufa in the early 1800s in Lithuania, and he was looked at as the leader of Lithuanian Jewry after the death of the Vilna Gaon. He's known as the Radal. The Radal wrote tons of things. His Hagoyis are printed in the back of the Gemara. Hagoyis Radal on the Gemara. He also wrote different svarim. The Radal was mamish a baki in Kol Torah Kula, from Nigla to Nistar, and all the things that he discusses a lot of things that are Nigla, a lot of Nistardik, and we're not gonna. He's the most comprehensive mefarish on Pirkei de-Rebbi. We're not gonna say every single shtick of the Radal, but some of the ones that we can at least begin to understand, I'll try to say over and we can discuss it and see what he's bothered by. Another mefarish on the Pirkei de-Rebbi in this edition is called Par Echad. It was written by Rav Chaim Falachi, who Be'erich lived in the same time, the early 1800s. He actually lived a little bit earlier than the three other Mefarshim. He was not in Lithuania. He lived in Turkey. and he was actually the Chacham Bashi of Izmir, and he wrote a sefer called Pirkei Echad. He doesn't have so many shtiglach Torah, but he has a few. There's also another mefarish called V'loi Oid Ella, but from Rabbi Eliezer HaKoyin of Izmir, who wrote a lot of sefarim also. But I don't think we're going to be speaking out his Torah so much, because I haven't really been myself to understand too much of what he says, and it's more like Jewish that's sort of like off topic sometimes. But maybe we're going to say from that. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do with him. These are the basic mefarshim that we have on Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. I just want to say over the Radal wrote a Hakdama to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and I want to say over a few nukudas from the Radal's Hakdama. The first, as we said before, that we said that the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is miyuchas to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer. So the Radal, the first part of his Hakdama, he notes that this sefer Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, HaSefer Hazeh Hanikra B'fi Kol Yisraelim B'Shem Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, Hu HaChibur HaRishon Shechober B'Yisrael Achar Shenechtam Al Chazayin Ksivas Sefer HaNevuah. It says it's the first sefer that was written after Tanakh. This is the first sefer that was written. There was Torah Shebechsav, and then there's this. This was the first thing that was written. And then V'loi Nimtza Itonu Chibur Muktam Bizman Loi. We don't have any sefer that was written before Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. That's what he says, the Radal. V'af Loi Noida we don't know anything else that was written before. And then he has a whole arichos about Megillas Tainus, which the Gemara discusses. Megillas Tainus was a list of days that you are not allowed to fast on, happy days that you're not allowed to fast on, and the Gemara says that Megillas Tainus was bottled, but it was written in the time of the early Tanoim by somebody named Hananiah ben Chizkiah, right? Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion, who wrote it down. So the Radal says that could be he lived earlier, but he was, because it says the Gemara says that he was from Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says, so the Radal is saying that he wasn't really a Talmud of Hillel. He was like from Beis Hillel. He learned there, but he wasn't really from the time of Hillel. He lived after Hillel. That's what the Radal wants to say. And it was written later, but Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer was the first thing that was written. That's one nukuda he wants to say. However, even though we say that Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is written from Rabbi Eliezer the Tana, but it's muchach from the Sefer itself that there were things that were added on later. He brings that the Sefer Yuchsin, Moshe Zakuta, and the Sefer Yuchsin says by the Sefer Yuchsin goes through the different Tanaim and Amoraim and says a little bit about them. So he says about Rabbi Eliezer HaKofer that Rabbi Eliezer HaKofer was one of the later Tanaim. And he says, even though Rabbi Eliezer HaKofer is quoted in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which was, as we said, is the first sefer that was ever written, so you would think that if it was the first sefer written, how could it quote somebody who's a later Tana? So he says, no, you should know that even though Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer was written by Rabbi Eliezer, and it's even, and the Radal saying it's the first sefer that was ever written, but it has later additions. So there were things that were added on Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that came afterwards. Maybe sometimes we could point out things that are like obviously written afterwards, but that's the Yisod. The Yisod is that it was written by Rabbi Eliezer. Could be it was the first sefer even, and there were things that were written that were added afterwards. Another nukuda that the Radal adds in his Hakdama to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is something that I actually noticed myself. That he also points it out, that a lot of things in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer are also found in Targum Yonis on Chumash, especially in Sefer Bereishis and Shmos. A lot of the different Drushim or whatever that you don't really find elsewhere, like Midrash Rabbah doesn't say like this, so but Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer does say it, and also Targum Yonis says it. So you have to understand what's the relationship between Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and Targum Yonis. One learns from the other learned from the one, or they were written maybe by similar people. I don't know. It's just something interesting to keep in mind. He says a lot of different nukudas over here. In Zakhtama, just one more nukuda is that a lot of things in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, we should know that the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that we have in front of us is not the complete sefer. There's a lot of things in the sefer that apparently are missing. We have he has in Oz Zayin in his Zakhtama, he quotes from different Rishonim that quote different things in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that we actually don't have those things. So he wants to prove from that there's things missing from what we have. So our Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is incomplete, and also it has extra additions. one of the things, one of the themes that comes up in this for a few prokim in the Sefer is that it talks about the Asara Yeridus that Hashem came down to the world. We don't know exactly what that means, but we'll see what that means. But if you look at it, it doesn't actually count 10 of them. It doesn't with 10. It comes, I think, with 8. So there's 2 missing. So there's the parts of the Sefer that are missing. It goes through a pirush, and it has a pirush on the brachas of Shemaya Esrei, but it doesn't actually go through all the brachas. There's some brachas that are missing. So I think it gets up to Rifa'inu or something like that, right? Okay, so I think it gets up to like Rifa'inu, and then it stops. And then, so what happens to the rest of it? Okay, so there's things that are missing. That's another Nukuda on in the Hakdama of the Radal. Just a point about the name of the Sefer, Pirkei de Eliezer. If you look in Rishonim, the Sefer is a Mukubal Sefer in the Jewish bookshelf, and Klal Yisrael has been learning it for hundreds, if not close to 2,000 years, whatever. In different sefarim, they quote the Sefer under different names. So it's interesting to know why we call it Pirkei de Eliezer. Seder of Amram Goin, from one of the Goinim, he brings down, he calls the Sefer Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus. That's the name that he gives the Sefer. There's a Tesis in Ksubis. Tesis in Ksubis on Tzarik Tesam and Aleph calls it Haggadas de-Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus. There's a Tesis in Megillah on the Gillian and Rashi. The Tesis in Megillah calls it Brisa de-Rabbi Eliezer. And that's also what the Radak in the Sefer Shirashim on the word Iver, he brings the Sefer, he calls it Brisa de-Rabbi Eliezer. The Rashi, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, he at least two places in Moreh Nevuchim calls it Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. The name that we call it, Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer, comes from Rashi. That's what Rashi calls it. Rashi in 2 places in Sefer Bereshis, Chav Zayin Tes and Yud Beis Yud Zayin, Rashi calls it Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer. Also Rashi in the Pirush on Sefer Yoina in Parak Aleph calls it Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer, and also Tesis and Shabbos on Kuf Daled brings down Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer. He calls it Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer. But all these other Mefarshim, they call it Pirkei. Also the Rekech, there's another name for it. The Rekech calls it Prakim de-Rabbi Eliezer. So they have the different Mefarshim call different things. Prakim de-Rabbi Eliezer, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, Hyrkanus, Haggadas de-Rabbi Eliezer, Brisa de-Rabbi Eliezer. It's just interesting to note. Could be I was just thinking about this too much, and most people won't be bothered by this, but if you actually think about the name Pirkei de-Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't make any sense, because Pirkei means chapters of, de-Rabbi Eliezer means of Rabbi Eliezer. So if you translate the name of the Sefer, it's chapters of Rabbi Eliezer. I don't know. It could be I was just thinking about this too much, but that's the name that we call it. We could have called it Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, like the Rambam, or Prakim de Rabbi Eliezer. I don't know. It's just interesting that we go with what Rashi calls it Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Another Nakuda, we said that, what time is it? Doesn't have a time? What? 8:10. Okay. We said that the Sefer is written by Rabbi as Miuchas to the Tan Rabbi Eliezer, and it has other things that were written that were added on afterwards. So, some Mefarshim want to say that the first 2 prakim of Pirkei de Eliezer, and I think this makes a lot of sense. The first 2 prakim of Pirkei de Eliezer is the story of how Rabbi Eliezer, of how Rabbi Eliezer went from being a Pashut farmer to becoming, one of the Gedolei Tanoim. That's the first story in Pirkei de Eliezer. That's the first 2 prakim, and then the 3rd parak starts off with the story of Brias Ha'olam. So some of Mefarshim want to say, and I think it makes a lot of sense, that the first 2 chapters of Pirkei de Eliezer were added on afterwards. And really, the Sefer starts from Parak Gimel, where it says in the beginning of Parak Gimel, it says Pasach Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus Pasach Mil Malal Gvuris Hashem Miyashbiya Kolti Lasoy, and then it starts darshaning about different things about Brias Ha'olam. That's the beginning of Parak Gimel. The first 2 prakim is a whole story about how Rabbi Eliezer went from being a Pashut farmer to being a big Talmid Chacham. Could be mistamol, even the name Pirkei de Eliezer, Lav Dafka came from him himself. The teachings of Parak Gimel and onwards, that he said over, someone later on was Mesederet, added these first two prakim and gave it the name Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. But some of the name itself, I don't think he wrote a sefer and called it Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Could be he did. I don't think it's muchach to say that he did such a thing. But it's a very interesting thing to see this the Rekeach. The Rekeach is one of the Gedolim of the Chasidei Ashkenaz, who's a Talmud Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. The Rekeach wrote a sefer of halacha, minhagim, different inyanim. The Rekeach, called the Rekeach HaGadol, he wrote. There's others from also that are miyuchas to the Beis Medrash of the Rekeach. The Rekeach, in his introduction to his sefer Rekeach, he writes the following. Why did I call my sefer Rekeach? His name was Rabbi Eliezer of Germaiza. Why did I call my sefer Rekeach? He says, the Karasi sefer is the Rekeach b'shmi Elazar. I called the sefer Rekeach in my name, Elazar. Why? V'simin Rekeach merkachas masei Rekeach shmai Elazar ben Yehuda. Because if you take the pasuk Rekeach merkachas masei Rekeach, you can get to the gematria of my name, Elazar ben Yehuda. And then he says something interesting. Kol adam tzarich l'risham shmai b'sefer. Every person should write his name in his sefer. Meaning, it sounds like it means that you should put your name in the name of the sefer. Kamai tana de Eliyahu masra vayigarish as adam lefi kain vayigarish kamai tana de Eliyahu. It's the sefer Tana de Eliyahu starts with the words the pasuk vayigarish min adam, and the words vayigarish min adam is the word vayigarish begematria equals Tana de Eliyahu. And Midrash Tadshe, which is also known as Midrash Tadshe, is printed in the Midrashim. Midrash Tadshe Maschil Tadshe Aretz Dasha pasuk in Parshas Bereshis Kamoi de-Rebbi Pinchas ben Yair. It was a Midrash written by Tana de Pinchas ben Yair. Midrash Tadshe, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was either a father-in-law or a son-in-law of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, as two gersais. But Midrash Tadshe and the word Tadshe Aretz Dasha is gematria de-Rebbi Pinchas ben Yair. Midrash Rabbah also is miyuchas to Rav Hoshaya HaGadol, and apparently in the beginning of the sefer is Merum as his name also. And he says Prakim de Rabbi Eliezer. He calls it Prakim de Rabbi Eliezer, not Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Prakim de Rabbi Eliezer maschilin mi'emala gevuras Hashem. It starts with the words mi'emala gevuras Hashem, which in gematria is Kamoi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus. In gematria mi'emala gevuras Hashem equals Eliezer ben Hyrkanus, the mechaber of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. You have to know exactly how to cheshbon it, but that's what it says. The beginning of the sefer is mi'emala gevuras Hashem. That's what the Rekeach says. And then he says Seder Olam also maschil be Adam ve'ad Noach. Seder Olam starts off with the words me Adam ad Noach, and me Adam ad Noach, and me Adam is gematria to the name of the Tana Rabbi Yossi. Other Mefarshim also bring down different sefarim that were written. The name of the sefer, the beginning of the sefer, or part of the sefer is miramis to who wrote the sefer. The Mata Moshe Mos, who is the Talmud of the Marshal, he has a sefer of Mata Moshe, which is halacha and hagim. He writes that the third parak of Eicha starts with the words Ani Hagever Roa Ani. He says Ani Hagever b'gematria is Yirmiyahu. And we know the Gemara in Bava Basra says that Megillus Kinus was written by Yirmiyahu Novi. Also, he brings down the first pasuk in Tehillim was the first pasuk Ashrei Ish. No, that's the first pasuk I forgot. Ashrei Ish Shaloi Halach B'Atzos Rasham, right? So that's the first pasuk in Tehillim. So if you calculate the gematria of the first pasuk in Tehillim, so you get to the gematria of the names of the 10 people that the Gemara in Bava Basra says wrote Tehillim: Avram, Moshe, David, Shlomo, Asaf, Asir, Elkanah, and Avi Asaf, the 10 people who were contributed to writing a Sefer Tehillim. So you see different places that the miramis to the name of the mechaber in the Sefer, or in the name of the Sefer, even. I once had a question on this Rekeach that I asked my Rabbi, and he gave me a simple answer, and I saw a different Sefer that says that asks this question and says a different answer, and I'll say it over a little bit right now. The Pirush Rekeach al Torah, which some people say was not written by the Rekeach himself, was written by maybe one of his Talmidim, but some people say it was written by the Rekeach. Pirush Rekeach al Torah in Parshas Matos talks about something interesting. In the end of Parshas Matos, so we have it says it's talking about the conquering of the Eretz Ever Yarden. So it says the Yor went and he conquered land and he called it Chavis Yor. And Noivach went and he conquered land. Veikar lo Noivach b'shmai. He called it Noivach. His name was Noivach. He went, he conquered the land and he called it Noivach. And if you look at Rashi over there, it says Veikar lo Noivach b'shmai. There's no dot in the word in the hay of Veikar lo Noivach b'shmai. So Rashi says it was because the name didn't stay, it didn't last. For whatever reason, it didn't last. Why didn't it last? I don't know. But maybe if we learn the Rekech, we can get a little bit better idea. The Rekech says, "Mi shekarei beisai oy iroi oy sifroi al shmai tzarich levakish rachamim sheyichyu banov oy hu ha'iseken." A person who calls his house or his city or his sefer on his own name, he should be mevakish rachamim that he and his kids would live. And it sounds like a pretty serious transgression here. He's saying, like, if you call, if your name is Alexander and you go and you open a city and you call it Alexandria, you better be careful. You might die early, right? And the Kachaba, Alexander the Great, he wasn't so old when he died. He went around the world starting cities or conquering cities, and he called it Alexandria. And other such things. So if you have a house or a city or a sefer, you shouldn't call it your name. If you do, he's saying it in a nice way. He's saying it's a shtickle sakana to do it. That's what Rekech is saying. So I was once wondering that this Rekech seems to be a contradiction to what we said before from the Rekech. The Rekech said you should be Maram is your name to the name of the Sefer or to the beginning words of the Sefer. And he's saying it's not a good idea. What? So I asked Rabbi Eliezer learner Shlita, the Machaber of Shmir Zeguf Nefesh. I asked him, how do you understand this Rekech? So he said a Pasha Chiluk, like what you're saying. If you call your sefer, I don't know, if your name is Moshe Shmerel, right, and you call your sefer Divrei Moshe Shmerel, so that's not a good idea. But if you I don't know, if your name is Moshe Shmerel and you call your sefer B'Shagam Hu Basar, and B'Shagam is a remes to Moshe Rabbeinu, so it's a remes to your name, so then that's okay. That's one way of answering the machlekes between the Pirush Rekech al Torah and the Sefer Rekech in the Rekech HaGadol. Also, interestingly, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in Savos Rabbi Yehuda Chassid writes like this. It's not clear exactly what he's talking about, but the different Mefarshim say different things, and it could be he's talking about a very similar thing that we're talking about. He says, "Lo yichtav adam ala sefer shalihu." A person shouldn't write on the sefer that it's mine. He shouldn't write shalihu that it's mine. You should write your name without writing that it's mine. So there's different ways to understand what Rabbi Eliezer is talking about. Some of Mepharshim say that you shouldn't take your physical sefer and write this belongs to Reuven Chaim Klein. You shouldn't do that. You should just write Reuven Chaim Klein. And some of Mepharshim even say that it's not talking about just a sefer, it's talking about even your shirt. Don't write on your shirt, this belongs to Reuven Chaim Klein. Write on your shirt, Reuven Chaim Klein. But some Mepharshim say, no, it's only talking about a sefer. It's not talking, if that's what it's talking about. Other Mepharshim say that what it's talking about is that when you write a sefer, you shouldn't write in the sefer Shalihu, that I wrote this sefer. Reuven Chaim Klein wrote this sefer. No, don't write who wrote the sefer. You should remain anonymous. Yalim Shmoy from the sefer. It should be not clear who wrote it. But you should be Maram as your name in it. That's what it says. But you should be Maram as your name in it. So some people wanted to say that the Rekech argues on Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. I saw a sefer that actually says that, even though the Rekech is a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Let's say Rekech argues in it, but I don't think it's machlekes. The Rekech is saying don't put your name in the sefer, meaning don't call it straight out. Divrei Moshe Shmerel. Rather, what you should do is be meramis to your name, and I think that Rabbi Yehuda Chassid and the Rekech, everything goes together very nicely. Stam, before moving back to the main topic of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, just why nowadays do people write their names in their sefer? If Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says you should remain anonymous, why this sefer was written by a person and we know what his name was? This sefer was written by a person, we know what his name was, and the footnotes on the bottom of that we know who his name was. So what's the pshat now? So Rav Chaim Falachi, and he has a sefer called Teichachas Chaim on Chumash in Parshas Bahaleischa. So he writes that Lamaisa nowadays you should be mefarsem who wrote the sefer, because otherwise people will think maybe some Russia wrote it or something like that, and then people won't take it seriously or they won't read it. So you should be mefarsem who wrote the name of who wrote the sefer. Similarly, in the sefer Yitav Lev, it was written, I think, by the Satmar Rebbe's father or the Satmar Rebbe's grandfather. I think it was either his father or his grandfather. The Yitav Lev in his Akdama writes that when a person writes a halacha sefer, you should write who you are. You should write your name. So maybe one could be like you're taking achrayus. It's like, this is what I hold, and you could be semich on me. But then the kudah is that if you have to know, one kudah, that first kudah, you have to know who's saying it. If you want to follow like that halacha, or you want to follow whatever he's ruling, you have to know who's saying it. If it's some guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, so then you should listen to him. But it has to be somebody who's taking achrayus for what he says. That's one nekuda. But he says the Yitav Lev says that. But when the person writes an Agadata sefer, it's a Agadata. You don't have to write your name in it, because if a person wants to read it, he can read it. He'll take what you say seriously. He'll take what he does not so seriously. People make their own decisions when it comes to Agadata. Then came along the Satmar Rebbe in his sefer Divrei Yoel in Parshas Chayei, and he says, no, Bizman Hazeh, every sefer you have to write who you are, because even if it's an Agadata sefer, it could be that one person would think it sounds good, but maybe you have krum hashkafas. You could be mekalkel people's deos and hashkafas, and then you're really saying the wrong thing, and you're putting it in very subtly, and people don't notice it, and they can't be mavchin between what's emes and what's sheker. So everyone has to write the name of their sefer. So nowadays, you don't have to be chayshish for Rebbe Chassid or Keach or whatever to not write. You should. I think it's better dafka to write your name in the sefer. It shows a psachrais. Going back to Pirkei de Eliezer, we're gonna finish off with this last section over here. I want to speak a little bit about who is Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, the author of the sefer. It's the shtickle zaytik isha, a side nukuda, but just to speak about who is Rabbi Eliezer, different things about him, to get a clear picture of what happened to him and whatever. The first two prakim in Pirkei de Eliezer, we're going to speak about how he went from being a farmer at Pasha to being a big Talmud Chacham, and what happened afterwards, and who is he. So, just to begin, there is a Midrash, it's a Midrash Tanchuma, I believe it's in Parshas Chukas. It says in the pasuk, V'shem Echad Eliezer. It says Parshas Yisro. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu had two sons. Asher Shem Echad Gershom, Ki Omar Ger Hayisi Ve'etz Nochia. V'shem Echad Eliezer, Ki Omar Ki Avi Be'ezi Ve'etz Lina Mechayev Pirkei. Right. So it says Moshe Rabbeinu had two sons. One, the name of the one was Gershom, Ger Hayisi Ve'etz Nochia, and the name of the one was Eliezer. So the Midrash dashes with me the name of the one. So the one is the name of the second. So what is it? The name of the one and the name of the one. She said the name of the second. So from this, the Midrash understands that there was something special about Eliezer. While we're still even though we're listing him second, we're still calling him the one, Shem HaEchad. Why? Why is he called Shem HaEchad? So the Midrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, so he heard somebody darshaning the first Mishnah on Mesachas Para Bash Nasayim Egla Bas Shalish. I think that's the first Mishnah Para. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, well, who is this guy? I hope that this person who's darshaning this, I hope he's going to be one of my descendants. And that was Rabbi Eliezer. So Moshe Rabbeinu saw Rabbi Eliezer Shemaim, and he wanted Rabbi Eliezer to be one of his descendants. So that's what it is, Shem Rachad Eliezer. It's a Jewish that the Midrash Tanchuma says. So that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is also called in other places Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. That's another name for him. We're going to see also later on in the first two prakim. His father's name was Hyrkanus, so he's also called sometimes Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus. Some Mefarshim say that when we say Stam Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, so some Mefarshim say that always means Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus or Rabbi Eliezer Gadol, our Mechaber over here. But other Mefarshim say that sometimes it could also mean Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua. The Seder Ders discusses that. I think he brings from Halichos Olam that says that Stam Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus, and he says that there's a Rashi, I forgot where, the Rashi says that Rabbi Eliezer means Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua. But most instances, Stam Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanus, our Rabbi Eliezer Gadol. He was the Rav in Lud. Lud is where the airport is, Ben Gurion Airport is in Lud. So that's where he was the Rav. And he was we're going to see in the Parak Aleph and Parak Beis and Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer that Rabbi Eliezer was a Talmid of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the Nasi of Klal Yisrael. He was the Nasi in the time of the Churban Bayis Sheni. And Rabbi Eliezer also, the Gemara says about Rabbi Eliezer that Rabbi Eliezer shamusihu. Rabbi Eliezer is mistaken, or he's another way of translating the word shamusi is he's a shamainik. Apparently, Rabbi Eliezer also learned afterwards. He went to Beis Midrash or to Yeshiva Beis Shammai, and he became a Beis Shammainik. And from that, we say that a lot of the times we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer because he goes with Beis Shammai and we go with Beis Hillel and Vizeh. We know that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a Talmud of Hillel. Gemara Bava Basra says that Hillel had 80 Talmidim. I forgot what it was. 80 Talmidim? I think 80 Talmidim. Hillel had 80 Talmidim. The most chashuv of his Talmidim was Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel, who the Gemara says that when he would learn that the birds flying over would get burnt from the fire of his Torah. That's the most chashuv of Hillel's Talmidim. And Kilu the shvachest kibiyachol of his Talmidim was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he became the Nasi. Right? So Rabbi Eliezer is the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as we're going to see. But afterwards, apparently, he went and he became a part of Beis Shammai, and because of that, we say Rabbi Eliezer shamusi. Rabbi Eliezer's Talmidim is from the most chashuv Tanaim. We have Rabbi Kiva is one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, a lot of other Tanaim are students of Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara in Megillah, Daf Gimel, I think, says that Unkelus Hager, the one who wrote Targum Unkelus, he wrote it kifi what he learned from Rabbi Eliezer. So Unkelus Hager is also Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer, and the Gemara is saying that if there's something that there's a difference in opinion, and Rabbi Eliezer would hold one way and other people would hold a different way, so Unkelus translated the Torah in a way that it's compatible with what Rabbi Eliezer holds, which is an interesting nekuda. Rabbi Eliezer, in a lot of places in Shas, Rabbi Eliezer argues with Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua, they always go together, and there's a lot of different arguments between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Just to speak out one of the arguments between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua, there's a famous one. When was the world created? B'Tishrei Nivra Olam or B'Nisan Nivra Olam? It's a famous machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Taisus in Rosh Hashanah maybe has a way of reconciling how it's not really a machlekes, but on the surface it looks like it's a machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Interestingly, in Targum Yonasan on this week's parsha, in Parshas Noach, what's one of the nafkamin between the machlekes B'Tishrei Nivra Olam and B'Nisan Nivra Olam? One of the nafkaminas is usually when the Torah says a date, so we know the month starts from Nisan. Right? Nisan is the first month, Iyar is the second month, v'chulu v'chulu. HaChodesh is Elachem Reish Chadashim. Nisan is the first month, but that only comes from Yetzias Mitzrayim and onwards. Before Yetzias Mitzrayim, when the Torah says a date, so it's mistama going from Brias Ha'olam. The question is, when is Brias Ha'olam? Is it in Tishrei or Nisan? So all the dates in the Torah that are before HaChodesh is Elachem, we don't know if it's starting from Tishrei or from Nisan. So that's machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Eliezer holds B'Tishrei Nivra Olam, we start from Tishrei, and Rabbi Shua holds B'Nisan Nivra Olam, we start from Nisan. Now the only nafkamina in this machlekes is the psukim in Parshas Noach, where it talks about the Mabul, and we don't know when it says the 17th day on the second month. Is that talking about Cheshvan according to Rabbi Eliezer, or is it talking about Iyar according to Rabbi Shua? So Targum Yonasan says straight out, we go like Rabbi. He goes. It's talking about Cheshvan. He goes like Rabbi Eliezer. Rashi says it's totally the machlokes. In at least in one place in the parsha, Rashi says it's totally the machlokes. Rashi doesn't necessarily take sides. He's just bringing that's the machlekes. But Targum Yonasan goes like Rabbi Eliezer. Now Targum Yonasan on Chumash was not written by Rabbi Yonasan Uziel. It was written after Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel. And we said before that Targum Yonasan has some kesher to Pirkei de Eliezer because the two of them share a lot of the same ideas that are not found in other sefarim. So that's an interesting thing to note. It's not also another thing in Targum Yonasan in this week's parsha by the Dor Hapalaga. So it says that we're gonna go mix up their languages. So Rashi has a pshat why Hashem said it in Lashon Rabbim. We're gonna go mix up their languages. But Pirkei de Eliezer, I don't remember if Pirkei de Eliezer says it as a drush on that pasuk or just says it as the story. But Pirkei de Eliezer says that what happened was Hashem sent 70 angels to go and mix up the languages into 70 different languages, and people got confused. Right? So that's what Pirkei de Eliezer says, and Targum Yonasan says the same thing. That Hashem sent 70 angels that made 70 different languages. So there you have also another instance where you have Targum Yonasan saying the same thing as Pirkei de Eliezer, which is not like Rashi and other Mefarshim. So we have Rabbi Eliezer, and we just discussed machlekes in between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua, and there's tons of other machlekes in between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. I have a sefer over here called Kivitz Yisedis V'Chakiros, which goes through the underlying premises and ideas between different machlekes and chakiros and a lot of like yeshivish type raid and lamdus. But in the back he has a list of like lishitasams and different mahalchim in different tanoim and amiroim. So he has a whole arichos, but he has 2 pages over here of listing off different approaches taken by Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua to the same issue, and showing how Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua are different from each other. I could pass it around if you want. You could look and see the different machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua in how they look at different things. That's one the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. On the other hand, even though Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Eliezer argued a lot, but they were also very good friends. And we find the Gemara in Gittin says that when they wanted to bring Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to go visit Vespasian, the Roman emperor who had a siege around Yerushalayim before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And this is the famous story in Gittin where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai went to, and he called him the king, or he called him emperor. He said, "What do you mean emperor? I'm not the emperor. I'm just the general. I came here to fight." And then it was up to the nevuah that he was going to become emperor. And then a few minutes later, they came in with messengers and said, "Oh, the emperor died, and they made you the emperor." And then he went back and he said his son Titus to go destroy the Beis Hamikdash. But Al Kaponim had Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai get in. Yerushalayim was under siege. So what they did was, They pretended like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was dead. They put him in a coffin, and then Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua, who are they argue with each other. They were the ones that carried his coffin. Kilo were going outside of Yerushalayim to go bury him because they're not allowed to bury people in Yerushalayim, except for Malchi Beis David. And they were the ones who were able to sneak Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai out of the siege of Yerushalayim, and he was able to go to Vespasian, and he was able to save Yavna v'Chachameha, etc., etc. So we have Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua, even though they're bar plugsas, they argue with each other, but they also work together. Another famous story about Rabbi Eliezer is called Tanur Shel Achnai. Rabbi Eliezer, there's a halacha that a kli cheres, a vessel made out of pottery, is if it becomes tamei, that's it. There's no way that you could be metaher it. You can't put it in the mikvah to be metaher. You have to destroy it. There's nothing you could do about it. So a kli cheres that becomes tamei, so the only thing you could do is smash it. If you smash it and rebuild it, so now it's tahar, because once you smashed it, it's no longer a kli, it became tahar, and then when you rebuild it, it's a new thing. So the question is, what would be if you made an oven, let's say, of the way I understood it, it's sort of like you made an oven out of like Legos, or out of a kli cheres of Legos, and you put it together, and then let's say it becomes tamei, so you take it apart, and then you put it back together, and then it's good, right? That's what Rabbi Eliezer held. Rabbi Eliezer held that Tanur Shel Achnai is tar. The other Chachamim said no such thing. You do it like that, it doesn't work. It's still tamei because it was made to be taken apart and put back together. Tanur Shel Achnai. So it was a whole machlekes Gemara in Bava Metzia. Talks about machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about this story, about this machlekes, and it was mamish. It was a very shver machlekes that they were arguing, And Rabbi Eliezer made all kinds of. He said, like, if I'm right, then this tree should move from here to here. If I'm right, this river that's flowing like this should start flowing backwards. If I'm right, the walls of the Beis Medrash should start caving in. And all these things happened. And a Bas Kol even came out and said, no, what are you doing? The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. And Afal Pikein, Rabbi Yeshua Aimer, Ein Mashgichim B'Bas Kol. Rabbi Yeshua holds we don't listen to a Bas Kol. What? Loi b'shamayim and ein mashkichin b'Bas Kol. That's two different nekudas. Loi b'shamayim and ein mashkichin b'Bas Kol. You can handle why the Gemara had to say both things, but Kobe has to do with.
Those are both reasons together, I think.
Yeah, but you have to know what each one is adding on. Could be because of the fact that because there's a Bas Kol that says that the halach is like Beis Hillel. So if you say that Rabbi Eliezer Shamusi, he goes like Beis Shammai. So who cares if he goes like Beis Shammai? But if you hold that you don't listen to a Bas Kol, so then there's no adifus of Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai. So that's why that's why you need both.
But is because they're the right.
What?
They're the right.
So it's a thesis in Yevamos that says that the shaila between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is what's better, roiv or charif tfei, mechadedi tfei. Which one's more chashuv to go to paskin, like the roiv or the people who are smarter? Beis Shammai was smarter, but Beis Hillel was the roiv. So that's the nukuda. And the Bas Kol came out and said, no, the halacha is like the roiv, even though Beis Shammai is smarter, but we go like the roiv. Al Kaponim, there was a whole machlekes of the Tanur, and they ended up putting Rabbi Eliezer in Cherem. They excommunicated him. It could be before he died they took it away, or after he died they took it away. There's actually a story of when in the Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about when Rabbi Eliezer was an old man and he was very sick and he was on his deathbed and all the different chachamim came to visit him and he started saying all kinds of things to everyone. He told Rabbi Kiva, like, I see in the future you're gonna die a misa mishuna. Rabbi Kiva, the Gemara in the end of Brachos talks about how Rabbi Kiva they killed Rabbi Kiva. Mamish a terrible, horrible story. But Rabbi Eliezer had episodes of these nevuas right before he died about what's going to happen to all these different chachamim. But in this story, it was mamish him against everyone else. So they put him in cherem. It was mamish a shrak chamatzev. One more nekuda before we finish. Stam, another interesting thing about Rabbi Eliezer, which is not so famous, that I thought the island would find it a little bit interesting. There's another story about Rabbi Eliezer that one time Rabbi Eliezer again, Rabbi Eliezer is living in this time of the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash under Roman rule, and the Romans in that period, one of the things that they were doing was they were persecuting the early Christians. So, or the people that had the same deus as the early Christians. So there's a Tosefta in Maseches Chulin. The Tosefta says that Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer shenitpas al divrei minus. The Romans came and they arrested Rabbi Eliezer for having divrei minus, for basically being Christian. So the Heloi said lebama lodun. So they brought him to the judge to have his din. The judge said to Rabbi Eliezer, "You're old man. You're involved in these type of things. Come on." So Amar Loi Neman Dayan Alai. So Rabbi Eliezer said, whatever the Dayan says is Neman. I believe I put my full trust in the Dayan. Yeah. So the judge thought that Rabbi Eliezer was saying that you done, Mr. Judge, whatever you rule, I trust in you. The Dayan that took that as a compliment. He's big step. Really, Rabbi Eliezer meant whatever Hashem is going to cause to happen in this case. I'm a kabul that Hashem was bringing it upon me, but the Dayan thought that he was complimenting the judge. So the judge said, "Okay, you're off the hook." But then what happened was, Rabbi Eliezer felt bad afterwards. That like it was like a bizayin for him. It was like big Talmud Chacham, and he was arrested for being a Christian. Like it bothered him that like maybe even made a chol Hashem. People heard about that he was arrested for being a Christian. It was bothering him. It was mitzvah him. Nichnasu talmidav l'nachamay v'lei kibel. His talmidim came to console him, to get him to calm down. It kept bothering him. Nichnas Rabbi Kiva came. Rabbi Kiva is his talmid who said, "V'amalei Rabbi, maybe I could say something to you. Shema enatam maybe I could say something and it'll cause it that you won't be so upset. Amar, you'll say it. Amar, he said, Shama echad min aminin amar l'cha davar shel minus v'hanacha. Maybe a Christian said something, a min said something, and you heard something and you got a no out of it. You enjoyed it. That's actually what happened. Hashemayim, I swear, his katani. You just reminded me that I was once walking down the street, or maybe in the town square in Tzipari, and Batsosi Yaakov ish kfar Sachanya v'Omar dover shel minus. There was this guy Jacob from Kfar Sakanya, and he was saying Christian teachings, divrei minus. V'haneni, and all interestingly, in the Tosefta, in the Lieberman edition of the Tosefta, it has an extra few words. It says v'Omar dover shel minus b'shem Yeshua ben Pandaria, in the name of that guy. And I enjoyed it. I got hana on it, and because of that, because I was kilu, I got hana from some Christian teaching. Because of that, Hashem gave me einish that I was arrested for divrei minus, for Christian teachings. Shavarti al divrei Torah, because I transgressed the divrei Torah that it says in Mishlei, Harchik Mala D'Rachava V'al Tigav Pesach Beisa. It's talking about a Zoina. It says Harchik Mala, stay away from her. D'Rachava V'al Tigav Pesach Beisa. Don't go near the entrance to her house. But we know that the Mishalim and Mishlei, Zoina is a mashal for Chachmei Minus. And it's saying that you should stay away from Chachmei Minus. And Rabbi Eliezer, he walked down and he heard it, and he had on, and because of that he's saying that's why he was punished. So I don't know if it means that he could be he was like walking down the street and he heard like one of these like Christian preachers saying like, yo, the end of days is near, oh, repent, oh sinners, and the day of reckoning is upon us, or something like that. And he said, oh, Taka, maybe I should do tshuva. So I don't think it was even like it was like mamish a Christian teaching. Maybe it was like stam, like he was saying stam, the Christians, they dashing about all kinds of stuff, and he took that as a muster for himself. And he tried to make himself better, even like api divrei Torah. But it came from a Christian guy who was saying out divrei minus. Maybe just to lighten it, to say that Rabbi Eliezer wasn't really listening to a Christian preacher. He took up as a mussar word from him. I know. Al kapanim, that's Rabbi Eliezer. Next week, Be'ezus Hashem, we will start the actual Sefer. And I'll what I was saying before. We'll try to go through it and say the Pashup Shat and read through it. What I would like is if anyone who wants to buy a copy of Pirkei de Eliezer, I guess it's only 3 people, right? You want to buy a copy? I went to the store and I found there's a cheaper one which only has the Bayis Hagadol. I think it would cost like 22 shekel. So anyway, if anyone could write down their name and phone number and email address. So like if you have email address, so I could like give you updates, like if we're gonna have a shir, we're not gonna have a shir, if it's gonna be late or whatever. And Be'ezus Hashem, we'll see each other next week, 7:00. Hopefully we'll be over there maybe, because if we get the lights or whatever, I don't know what happened this week. But if not there, then here. Be'ezus Hashem next week, 7:00. Okay, call to Shkerech.